I grew up with an artist, so as far as about art and design and more broad topics, it was just part of my growing up experience. My folks, saw to it that we got out and saw things, and sometimes it was in a museum, and sometimes it was the little patch of mustard next to the barn that they'd be pointing out for us to look at. One of the things that really interests me about working in this medium is pushing the boundaries and discovering new techniques. 20 years ago, nobody had thought of using beadwork as a contemporary art form. And when I thought of it, there were a lot of people who tried to guide me away from it, but I just was compelled beyond reason to do this. When I started working in beads, I, like a lot of other people, kind of associated them with fashion. And so I went and got my degree in apparel design, and I started doing a little bit of work for fashion designers, and I made some jewelry, but it wasn't very long until I realized that I wasn't really interested in what everybody else was doing, and I wanted to try something new. I felt a little confined by working always over the rigid form, and it didn't allow you the spontaneity to, change your mind halfway through, and there were just a lot of limitations that I felt like that invited. So then I started to figure out some ways where I could incorporate armature and some other stitching techniques that created structure, and so then the work becomes more structural. So you can kind of see the piece that's at the end of the vessel display is the bubble bowl, and that's really the bridge between the older work and the newer work. It is something that cannot be hurried, and it is a one bead or a two bead at a time proposition. One of the frustrating things for me is that my head works a lot faster than my hands. And so the piece evolves as I'm working on it, but I'm also thinking about the next piece, and I think as an artist, you really pay attention to what your eye goes to and what you're drawn to and images that you're drawn to, and then eventually some of those things show up in your work. I don't really plan very much. Some pieces are very linear, where I have the idea in my head and I sit down and I make that piece, but that is a rare piece. The piece that I did about September 11th was a very linear piece. I got an image in my head and I went for that image, and it changed a little bit, but not very much. But most of the other pieces evolve as I go along, and I like to call this jar full of samples up here my sketchbook, because I'm much more likely to sit down and just start sewing beads together, and I'll get an idea in my head for a little bead architecture and something that I think will create an interesting curve or an interesting kind of structure, and I'll sit down with the beads and I'll just start sewing things together. And sometimes that's the beginning of a big piece, and sometimes it's something else to add to the jar. So that's really how I sketch, is with the materials in my hands. If you look at Confrontation in the Green Room, I mixed all my flesh tones together so that I could get this kind of, because we aren't all one color, we're a lot of different colors, and so I think it's interesting sometimes to mix just colors that are very close to each other together, and you get some real subtle, I think it adds depth to the work. This is a piece that I started working on after the Janet Jackson debacle, and I saw this image just sticks in my mind of this weeping woman crying into the news camera that her family's day had been ruined and her son had seen a fraction of a second of what might have been somebody's nipple. And and all the news timing, this was like in an election cycle that we were getting all of this news devoted to this silliness. And I just started to think about, why are people getting so upset over a polka dot? And why is my polka dot okay, but your polka dot is obscene? It's one of those absurdities that exist in our culture that we clutch to ourselves. And it seemed like nipples as polka dots was a fun idea to pick up and run with, and so this is wardrobe malfunction. Sometimes you get a different perspective when you don't see something for a while, and when you put it in the box, you mail it off because you're late for your deadline or something. You don't get a chance to just sort of interface with the work, and then if it goes away for a long time and it comes back, you see it differently. And so there was some of that where I'm sort of reintroducing myself to the work, and I can see how my work has progressed, and I can see what I've been learning, and I remember working on, I remember each of those pieces represents a chunk of my life. So a lot of pieces I associate with certain places where I lived or certain people that I was spending time with while I was working on those, and so it was almost like rifling through an old journal. It did give me a feeling of, well, now what? I've done this, and are the next 20 years, do I want to do this again? Do I want to continue to do this? And how do I want to see my work develop? And I'm still answering that question, but it seems to be a convergence of a lot of things in my life right now. There's a lot of things that have kind of come to this place, and so it is a feeling of standing here and looking back, and also looking at the future and deciding, what I want to parlay this experience into. And I'm still answering that, but one of the things I find myself increasingly drawn to is working with objects that have meaning for me and combining them with beadwork, because, why beads is a question that I've been asking myself, and I will continue to ask myself. But I think what they do is they provide that magnet. They can take a non-precious object, and you contain it in a beautiful container that's been made with painstaking stitching, and it embeds that object with a certain amount of reverence almost. But I'm always seeking ways to find new meaning and to hone my vision and to hone my message, and to really figure out for myself, how I can be the most articulate that I can be with the tools that I use.